This is Jim Pete from waitingfornextyear.com with the Dave Sterling advertising moment. If you're listening to this podcast, please do me a favor and head over to our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, get into the search engine, and type waitingfornextyear.com. Click on our YouTube channel and check out all of our content that's there. We have tons and tons of new content. Jeff Nomina has really spearheaded a new kind of initiative at the site to really diversify our content. You'll see tons of stuff there about all the sports, and we're working towards trying to get up to where we can be a daily YouTube broadcast. So please check it out, subscribe. The subscribing does nothing. If you don't want it to notify you, you don't have to, but it will notify you if you want it to of every new YouTube video that we have. Check out waitingfornextyear.com's YouTube channel. And with that being said, here's Gage, Will, and myself talking Indians baseball. Welcome to another edition of Everyone Hates Cleveland, the podcast. Gage Will joining me for the second EHC podcast in a row. I don't know. I guess that makes you the regular now. Yes, I feel like we're the rebels against Jeff Nomina taking over the entire YouTube channel. That's what I feel like right now.
I'm just booting Hattery out of his spot.
Hattery hasn't mentioned podcasting in a while. The only time he mentions it's when I'm driving to North Carolina. I think there's a plot afoot. No, Mike will be on these. Mike and I always do these preseason positional things, and once everything gets squared away, which we're going to talk about here in a second, because there's as I guess slow as the hot stove season tends to be in November, the Indians of course have a ton of stuff going on. Kind of behind the scenes, more or less, other than a couple of signings that we're going to get into right now. While I need to talk about Brantley because my 13-minute rant when I was talking to myself wasn't enough, I do want to start off with Carlos Santana. The Indians offered him the qualifying offer, $17.5 million. Gage, I'm going to let you ramble on about this because you and I both know these don't tend to get picked up, but they can, but they don't tend to. And this is a weird market for first basemen, but it does seem to me that Carlos Santana is going to be one of those, I don't want to say upper tier, that might not be the right word, but maybe an upper tier guy this year. It looks like he's probably going to get somewhere around 17.5 per from somebody, because you have to imagine that some of these clubs with some money might go after him, including a team like maybe the Yankees. What are the chances that Carlos Santana picks up this qualifying offer and giving the Indians a chance over this next year to maybe sign him long term?
The chances aren't really good on the surface. I know some people have brought up the point that everybody's gearing up for the big 2018, the free agent class next year, so there might be saving some money. But Harper and Manny Machado hitting free agency. Yeah. So there is some talk that the Yankees might be conserving some cash until next year. But
because they've got to be all in on Harper. I mean, that to me seems like a no-brainer.
Or even Machado. I mean,
third base
either.
Yeah.
But I think Carlos would be crazy to pick it up personally. This is, how old is he? 30, 31?
31. Going into his age 31 year. I mean, to me, you've got to splash big now. Even if you don't get 17.5 per, if he can get a four-year deal, or maybe, something near the Encarnacion deal, you got to go for that, right?
Right. I mean, he's been the Iron Man who's played 150 games every year, but I mean, is that luck, or is it – I wouldn't say it's all luck. He's a very tough guy. But still, you want to take that – he's going to get a 4-year – even if he got 4 years, $60 million, that's better than a 1 year, $17 million shot, right?
Yeah, well, and that locks you up for your prime years, and like I said, even waiting a year, especially – I'm not saying his numbers are volatile. That's not the right way to say it. But and especially with him kind of locked in at first base, you kind of think maybe he could have a big year if he did sign a 1-year deal. But I just think, in this day and age, with a player like Santana's ability and the value that certain general managers have for his skill set, you have to imagine that the should-be Gold Glove winner at first base, a guy potentially can hit 30 home runs, a guy who walks a ton, his OBP is always high, a guy who laces doubles like there's no tomorrow. I mean, this is a cog in a lineup, especially a set lineup, who could really kind of push it over the edge. To me, at the very least, someone's going to offer him a pretty good 3-year deal. We're going to get into Jay Bruce's wants here in a second, but you got to imagine that probably if the sky's the limit for Jay Bruce and his 5-year and $80 million wants, well, you got to imagine though, the startup for Santana in his head has to be similar to me. I mean, do you think that in Santana's head, maybe every free agent's head, if you go back to look at, I retweeted an Edwin Encarnacion post where he was looking for 5 and 100 last year. Is Santana looking for maybe 5 and 80? Is that kind of his top of the line kind of thoughts? And yeah, go ahead.
If Jay Bruce is looking for 5 for 80, Santana deserves 5 for 100.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, but let's get real. Bruce is throwing that out there. His agent's throwing that out there as kind of a starting point. So I mean, legit starting point for Santana is probably similar to that number, and he'll likely get something closer to that than Jay Bruce.
Yeah, I want to get back to we've known Santana for a long time, but for the last 7 years, he's been a 3-WAR lock.
Yeah.
I mean, in this past year, part of it came with fielding. It wasn't even a great hitting year for him. Second half, but it wasn't his best offensive output. But I would think that his baseline is like in his head is 5 for 75, 5 for 80, like you said.
Right.
And I don't know if he's going to get the 5 years, just being that he's a first baseman but we saw last winter how Mark Trumbo and Edwin Encarnacion and all those, and even your Chris Carter, who's not a great player, but he basically got a show me deal, and he was coming off 35 homers or something like that.
Right.
So teams last winter just didn't value first base. And that's what's working against Carlos and working in the Indians' favor in these negotiations.
But see, here's the trick for me. And the reason why I wanted to start off with Santana is because when you start your offseason off by signing Michael Brantley, and I hate that I have to take the stance with Michael Brantley because he's been such an important piece to the Indians in many different ways over the past really 9 seasons. Think about that. Brantley's been part of this team since that Sabathia deal in 2008. I mean, this is a guy who's been with the organization as long as anybody. Perhaps helped set up the prototype for that contact first hitter, one of the best IQ players on the team. And the fact of the matter is they signed a guy who's not a good left fielder, who's injury prone. And I don't care that the injuries aren't related. This is a guy who hurt his ankle really bad playing left, making a fairly routine play. I just think he's an injury prone guy. I mean, the only reason why you signed, to me, Michael Brantley is to perhaps put him at first base. I mean, if the Indians are really thinking of leaving him in left field, I don't know. There's so many questions there for me. I mean, does it seem to you that this Brantley deal is really kind of a pre-strike to let Santana walk? I mean, it seems to be set up, especially since they offered him the qualifying offer.
I mean, they had to offer him the qualifying offer first thing. You can't. You can't be upset if he takes it. You're not upset if he takes it, and if he ends up walking, you get a draft pick. But I'm really trying to look at the Brantley and Santana stuff independently, because you have to make those decisions independently in my head. But I can't trust. I guess it's $12 million. So they're looking at $12 million on a guy who's 3 years removed from being one of the best hitters in the game, I guess. And I know you said the injuries aren't related. It's
well, I'm saying that. I'm not thinking that. I'm saying that because this is the take. I think that most fans, when you look at Michael Brantley and you look at Carlos Santana, I think the take you're going to get with Carlos Santana. I had this conversation with a fan who thought I was going to go with the get rid of Los kind of mentality. I'm walking my kids around for Halloween and of course wearing an Indian shirt, and hey, the Indians are finally going to get rid of Carlos Santana, and I'm thinking to myself, and they signed Brantley, and I'm thinking, my gosh, how is it possible that I'm the exact opposite take as this guy? And I think the Joe average fan, and this is no knock, I mean, I get it, is that Brantley's injuries aren't related. He's going to have the surgery. He's going to come back, and he's going to be the guy who played 90 games and who was in the All-Star game. And I can see the point. It's not true, but I can see the point. And of course, the knock on Santana is that he's never been the 320, 30 home run, 100 RBI guy, which, oh man, you haven't seen me on this podcast ranting yet. I'm getting myself really close to it. So I'm going to stop and let you talk for a while. I'm going to mute my mic and I'm going to drink my beer and I'm going to let you take over, because if not, it's going to be ugly.
Well, getting to the Brantley stuff, here's what I don't understand about picking up. I don't want to get into this completely because, like you said, I love Michael Brantley. I like what he did for the Tribe, but it just seems so obvious that the option was a no-go to me. And just because his offensive ceiling feels like he's a singles and doubles guy now. And that's what a lot of fans see is that batting average, which is fine, but I don't think he's the Michael Brantley that can hit 20 home runs anymore.
And that power is what made him, in my opinion, an elite offensive player.
Right. And did you see that power last year? Maybe one little flash in the middle of the summer?
Yeah, there was that 2-week span, I think, where we started to see it a little bit. And I remember making a comment, if he doesn't get hurt, it looks like maybe he's found it again. And of course, gone.
And he's a fun hitter to root for too, because he doesn't strike out. He works counts. He's not a huge walk guy, but he makes pitchers work to get him out. So it's easy for fans to pull for him.
Sure.
But he's just that high singles type hitter to me. And that just doesn't have a great ceiling to provide surplus value on that $12 million option.
Right.
And then you get to the Santana stuff, who is a huge ISO, like huge isolated power guy and my favorite part of Santana is in his lulls, he still provides you value by walking. He'll go through that month stretch where he can't get a hit, it seems like, but he still gets on base. He's a 90-walk guy every season. I mean, that's invaluable in the middle of the lineup because everybody's going to slump. So I'm really hoping. Go ahead, Jim.
No, I just think, and I think the one piece to all this is we keep hearing, and to kind of move into another direction with this, we keep hearing about the locker room guys, and we keep hearing about Francona, of course, and Michael Brantley, of course, and not a lot of discussion. I really get kind of fired up when we don't hear these different levels of Carlos Santana, because the one thing I'm positive of, and if you follow Carlos Santana on Twitter and if you follow Carlos Santana at all, is it seems to me, just based on things that I've heard and things that I've seen, that Carlos Santana is a really important piece to this locker room. I mean, let's not forget that Carlos Santana was a catcher for a while. He did gain rapport with pitchers. This is a guy who chose to play third base out of nowhere, and I know he played a little bit. I know the Indians are clearly high on a guy playing a few games of a position in the minor leagues, because Michael Brantley is a first baseman, according to, well, I don't even want to go there, but I mean, and he kind of got knocked on that because he wasn't very good. And go figure, he tried to figure out on the fly at the major league level how to play third base. But you got to appreciate a guy who wanted to play third base at the major league level, probably knowing what was going to happen there. He wants to stay in the game, doesn't want to be a DH. He goes to first base. He plays left field when they ask without hesitation. This is a guy who does everything they ask him to do. And he gets knocked on occasion for not trying hard. And if you go back 2 years, Francona was talking about effort. And then we find out a day later, after Francona was ripping on his effort, that he had a bad back almost the whole entire season. This is a guy who doesn't complain, and to me, has the locker room. Losing a guy like Santana, to me, is a big deal on so many different levels, because he's the glue on offense, and you cannot deny that. You mentioned the amount of games this guy plays year after year after year. Concussions, everything that this guy's gone through. He comes back on a dime, plays 130 plus games every single year, plays multiple positions when asked, and does everything in the locker room that everybody always talks about with other players, but we see it with our own eyes with Carlos Santana, and nobody talks about that. So losing Santana to me is a huge deal, and especially I want to get into this Kipnis stuff too. You sign a guy like Brantley who's not really been around the past 2 years, other than sitting around trying to get healthy. You start messing with some things that I don't know that the Indians want to be messing with.
And I want to mention this too. Remember in spring training when Francona solicited input on his lineup from two guys, Jason Kipnis and Michael Brantley?
Yeah.
I still go back to that. Where is Carlos Santana? He's the guy that has been a staple in the lineup as long as those two have.
Think about all the places that they've moved him in this lineup. Yes. He's been the cleanup hitter. He's hit first. He's hit sixth. They bumped him to seventh. And he never, ever complains. Now let's talk about, you hear rumblings about them asking Brantley to play first last year and he didn't want to. Jason Kipnis is Jason Kipnis, but even Kipnis, maybe a little crotchety, but he still moves around in positions. And I understand talking to those two guys, but you're right. Santana, again, who's been there longer? And this is a guy who produces every single year.
So we get into the loyalty card with Brantley and giving him that option. If there's anybody on this club that deserves loyalty, it's number 41.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess maybe that's the whole point of all this is everything you can say about Brantley, you absolutely positively can say about Carlos Santana. So it's going to be an interesting, I think, month or so as we kind of watch and see how this plays out. Is it one of those situations where maybe, is there a chance? And we hear this so many times with Carlos Santana or with other players, and it never pans out. Is it possible that Santana wants to stay? And is it possible that maybe nudge, nudge, wink, wink, the Indians are saying, you sign this 1-year deal and we'll give you your 3-year deal at the end? Is it possible?
I don't know. I've heard, I don't want to get into he said stuff, but Santana loves Cleveland. Santana, but I want to make a note too. I believe he hired new representation last year.
Yeah, I did.
So that, for me, that doesn't bode well in the, hey, staying here, I want to give you a hometown discount department. If you're hiring new representation, you're trying to maximize your value, right?
That's what it seems like to me. And I think, I want to say it happened around the same time that the Encarnacion deal went through. And it's, I remember, you try not to correlate these things. I remember thinking to myself, is this like Santana trying to say, I don't really want my deal to fall as much as Encarnacion's did. And Encarnacion got a great deal. I'm kind of mincing words, but again, like Jay Bruce, he started way high and it ended up coming down a little bit so the Indians could afford him. All right. So Carlos Santana and Michael Brantley notwithstanding, I think one of the most interesting pieces to me, Gage, is that I think one of the most interesting statements to me is when Antonetti, the front office, alluded to Jason Kipnis and not really knowing what they were going to be doing with him moving forward. So, is he – at the end of the day, I think, some of us are kind of harsh with him at second base. The realities of Jason Kipnis is healthy. Jason Kipnis is a lock 4 to 5 WAR guy. And using WAR in any possible – there are people probably shaking their heads with this, but I think even the every fan can understand the value that Jason Kipnis gives the Indians, both offensively and really defensively when he's healthy. Last year he wasn't healthy. He's only a year removed from a 5-WAR season. Should it just be Kipnis at second and J-Ram at third, or are they legitimately thinking about moving him to left field? Are they legitimately thinking about making him a center fielder? What are your thoughts on this? Or are these little whispers about potentially trading Jason Kipnis more than just whispers?
See, before picking up the Brantley option, I would have been all in on the left field experiment. But Brantley's bat doesn't play enough at first base for me. And it's just it seems hard to invest 26 million in Kipnis and Brantley coming off of this 2017. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, why can't it just be easy? Everything seems so easy. Just, let Brantley walk and sign him to something incentive laden, and then you just force him to be a pinch hitter until he proves otherwise, right? I mean,
the organization seems fully committed to Jose Ramirez at second base, which I'm good with.
Right.
But you got to find something with Kipnis. And I honestly think that people in Cleveland tend to – I've been more than harsh on Kipnis in the past, over 2017. Maybe too harsh at times. But I think the reality is there is still some value there. It's just not a whole lot of surplus value with this contract. And
so, I mean, this is where the trade to me comes in. I mean, he's obviously on a down year, but there's still, obviously 1 year removed from a fantastic season. Is there trade value there? Is it silly to sell him now when it's obviously a sell low?
I think he has more value to the big market teams that can stomach. The Indians make a living on surplus value on contracts because – they've climbed the payroll the past couple of years and kudos to the Dolans for that. But they still have to make their buck on getting Corey Kluber type. No, there's no contract like that in baseball, but that's a perfect example of he is maybe the best value contract in baseball, and that's why he's a good fit on the Indian for what they want to do. And Kipnis making, I don't know the exact figure, $13 million or something like that in this year.
Yeah, I think it's either 13.5 this year and 14.5 next year, or 14.5 next year and 15. I can't remember the exact numbers.
But even if you're saying he's a 3-WAR guy, which is probably a good estimate at this point, that's just not a whole lot of bang for your buck on that. Whereas the Yankees can say, "Oh, hey," I'm not saying trade him to the Yankees, but I'm just using a big market team as an example here. They can say, "Oh, hey, we can afford to pay him this, and he can give us 2 to 3 WAR, and we'll be happy with it and go."
Right. Well, and they do have surplus. I mean, they do have surplus talent in that system of theirs. So, the Yankees to me are these major players kind of in the market this year because obviously they have a surplus of talent and tons of money. And I know they're not going to spend a lot of money because obviously they've got some big contracts that are coming off the books at the end of next year. But it does seem to me that the Yankees are going to be one of those teams that are players, as are the Red Sox, as probably are the Cubs, just because that's who they are. And like you were saying, 13.5 for Kipnis this year, 14.5 next year. Wow. I think in the grand scheme of Major League Baseball, that's a great contract for anybody, including the Indians. At the same time, the margin for error, as you said, that 3-WAR potential, maybe more. That's a real fine line. And if he gets hurt, he plays hard. If he gets hurt, it just seems the older he gets, the more likely that's going to happen. And if it's second base, they can't protect him. So I don't know. That's the interesting. So percentage wise, where do you, what's your percent chance he's playing left?
With Brantley now, 5%. I'm not real. Maybe even lower. I'm not very confident that anybody but Michael Brantley will be out there. But then again, I'm not confident Brantley is going to be ready for day one.
Well, see, that's
injury.
Well, and this could be. And I will say this about Tito Francona. And listen, I mean, Terry Francona is one of the 5 best managers in baseball, depending on how you look at it. He does manipulate injuries very well, and we could ETA Michael Brantley right now. I think if you say any time before May, you're wishful thinking. But is it possible that we get a scenario where they're counting on Brantley not being back until May, using Kipnis in left, putting Ramirez at second, doing something at third base, which we'll get to in a second? Is this kind of maybe what they're thinking?
That's kind of the thought I've been sketching out in my head is if Brantley's not ready, Kipnis can naturally go out in left field because I was one of the biggest advocates against him playing center field, and his arm is just not good in the outfield. That was why he got moved to second base in the first place. But he didn't have terrible – we'll face it, there were a couple really bad ones in center field, but that's center field. left field in Cleveland is not a really difficult outfield spot to play. I wasn't that discouraged by his effort out there. I'll just say it that way.
No, I mean, he covered more ground than he thought he could. That to me makes him potentially a solid left fielder. I think the arm plays decent out there, and he does have experience. I mean, he definitely. He definitely needs some time in the outfield. I'll leave it at that. I do think that his game plays out in left. But I mean, I guess Zimmer's the obvious lock to me in center. I mean, he's starting the year in center field, right?
Yep, and then you got Chisenhall, who seems like a lock for right field, barring anything big in hot stove.
Yeah, world. And I mean, and you've got Geyer, of course, coming back, and he'll be healthy. Yeah. And you've got to assume that the normal candidates that we've been talking about. Now you've got Greg Allen in the mix as well. You got Almonte, of course. I guess then the question becomes, let's kind of take care of this. These kind of side talks. Like, is there any chance that Austin Jackson is back with this club, or is a center fielder, left fielder candidate with the offensive year he had too valuable to sign to a 1-year deal? In his eyes, I mean, is Austin Jackson in line for maybe a 2 or 3 year deal outside of Cleveland?
I've had him pegged as a 2-year, $17 million sign somewhere, even though the Indians did a good job of masking him in a way last year, putting him in position to be successful by not playing him every day. And
got to give Francona credit there.
Francona was fantastic in his usage of Austin Jackson in the regular season. But I think there's enough outfield needy teams out there to take a 2-year, $17 million shot on a 30-year-old Austin Jackson.
Yeah.
I believe he's 30.
I want to compare him to Rajai Davis, but I mean, Rajai Davis is 37. I mean, they're not even in the same playing field. I mean, Austin Jackson, I guess just looking at him from far away, without really paying much attention to his past 3 seasons prior to signing with Cleveland. I mean, 30-year-old guy who had a pretty good year. The right team gets him. Who knows if they use him right, what he can produce. But, man, good luck if they're going to use him every day in center.
He didn't – after knee injuries, what do you expect? But he didn't look as fleet of foot as I ever remembered him being. So that is something that teams will look at. But I still don't think there's a very good chance of them retaining him at any gamble I'd like to take. I'll just put it that way. I would – think that the front office will move on to a different 1-year gamble type maybe out there. I don't know who those names are. I haven't really dug into it, but
yeah, we'll be getting into that. I think as the hot stove season progresses, we got winter meetings coming up and such. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Danny Salazar really quickly. With Trevor Bauer becoming, I guess cementing himself into the rotation. It looks as though the Indians have, their top 3 kind of locked. They have a bevy of guys, including Clevenger and Tomlin now, of course, who are going to be battling for those bottom-end jobs. And, of course, Danny Salazar, who has been as roller coaster a ride, I think, performance-wise, as anybody has been over the past 5 or 6 seasons. That elite potential is still there. I mean, we saw a little bit of it last year, even though he did struggle overall. I still think you saw that strikeout potential, and he did get a lot of bad luck, obviously health being an issue. I'm going to throw 2 your way, and I'm going to try to keep as quiet as I can because I love Danny Salazar, but chances that he's traded, chances that he ends up in the pen, which is what everybody's been calling for really almost since he started in the rotation. Is it finally time to move him to the pen?
I just wrote a piece actually up at Waiting for Next Year about Danny Salazar. And my goal with Danny is the last 2 seasons in the playoffs, we haven't gotten to see the real Danny Salazar. So I want to figure out a way to get him active in October and use him the right way in October. And I looked at what the Houston Astros have done with Chris Davinsky, and he pitched 112 or 100 and change innings in 2016 and 82 innings in 2017. That's kind of the mold I'd like to see him use Salazar in, a middle of the game 2-inning relief guy. If you got a 4-4 game or something like that. And you don't want to go to Miller or Allen just yet. And that's one of the other – I love Danny Salazar, the starter, but I don't know if that's in the cards with his arm and his elbow. And the Indians have 5 guys that they can throw out there in the rotation and not be nervous about. But
it sort of feels like to me and I'm just trying to read the Indians and how they've handled him over the past 2 seasons. It sort of feels like to me that Danny Salazar, when he gets hurt, that his getting hurt is a lot different than, say, a Trevor Bauer, who never gets hurt. But see if you can understand where I'm going with this. That there are times when Danny Salazar is legit hurt and they have to do something with him. And then there's some times where something feels tweaked or something doesn't feel right. And he himself maybe either alters the way he's pitching, or he himself perhaps is saying or doing some things to not potentially pitch. And this is just speculation. I love Danny Salazar. The talent is fantastic. And he's always been, I covered him when he was way back in the day when he was in Kinston. He's just one of my guys. Does it seem to you, though, that maybe there's a tolerance issue? And you can take that word at whatever angle you want to. But do you think that maybe the issues that the Indians have had with him over the past 2 years, and it seems like they're annoyed with him all the time, is that he just doesn't have the kind of tolerance that you need to have as a starting pitcher in a Major League Baseball season?
I want to hit on your first point about him pitching differently. I'm not a pitching guru by any means. I study these figures we get from Brooks Baseball and Baseball Prospectus. I just take looks and just a casual eye looking at him. But his vertical release point is all over the map.
I mean, it's insane. This is kind of where, this is where I was starting there. Yeah, I mean,
it looks like there are just seismic shifts throughout the graph. So there is something different in his delivery. It's getting that consistent. I heard Mickey Callaway harp on it all the time, but getting that consistency, that motion, and getting to your other point, Danny Salazar, it seems like there's a little bit of like adversarial nature between both ways, not only with the Indians towards him, but I think he might be, this is pure unadulterated speculation, but I think he's a little upset that he's never seen that extension money, that he's still wandering through the arbitration. And I know he hasn't been healthy, but I think that there's a little play both ways there. That I'll just, like I said, pure speculation. But
yeah, there's something. I mean, it's insane. I mean, by the way, if you haven't read Gage's piece, make sure you do that. It is an interesting look. I think. Let me throw something else to you too. Could you ever see the Indians, and they played around with this, a little after the summer, a little after the midpoint of the year, with a 6-man rotation, perhaps, but throwing your top guys every 5th day. Could you see a scenario where the Indians, with their multitude of guys, and you probably have a guy like Shane Bieber moving into the mix this year, and you still have a guy like Moramondo, with all of these guys that are probably not ever going to be 1, 2, or 3 guys in the Major League system, or in a Major League rotation? Could you see the Indians utilizing maybe a 6-man rotation if they decide to keep Salazar in the rotation, to maybe keep some of those innings down on him, and maybe even get a guy like Clevenger a little more fresh heading into the playoffs, getting a Salazar a little more fresh? Or do you really think that the Indians are going to bump him to the bullpen? Because it's certainly, that's kind of the side I'm at. But could they get creative? It seems like Francona is willing to get creative occasionally with the rotation.
They could, but I think it'd be really hard with the guys that you have in the rotation. With Corey Kluber, who repeatedly states that he likes going on normal rest, and Trevor Bauer, who wants to pitch every second day or whatever it is. It'd just be really hard to work that with those 2 guys. That you had that conversation with Trevor Bauer coming off a career year. You tell him that he's getting knocked back a day or 2. Oh, no, sorry. Carl Willis can tell him that. Carl Willis.
Oh, man. You please don't mention that. God. How do you – I'm muting again.
So
you're egging me on purpose.
You can always count on Jason Beret. Oh wait, I mean,
Come on, man.
Scott Atchison.
Well, I've heard good things about Atchison, so I mean,
Yeah.
I'm gonna trust Michael Hattery on this one, but I'm still a little hesitant. I mean, I'm sorry. Maybe it's just because I remember Atchison pitching, but okay. Let's move on. Let's move on quick.
Jim, I wanted to ask you real quick. Third base is the other big one. Third base.
You probably already know where I'm going to go with this, but go ahead. Ask I mean,
Gio
okay, so
or Yandy Diaz. That's what it's going to be.
I mean, if you're legitimately looking to upgrade the position, I mean, we got to see Giovanni Urshela last year for an extended period of time in the most crucial of situations, and I think you saw what the Indians have been really fretting about him offensively over the length of him being with the Cleveland Indians, and that's a psyche that struggles with new and struggles with change and struggles with stressful situations. He always seems they've tried to fix his swing multiple times, and he always reverts back to the same swing that we were seeing really all of last year. It got to the point where offensively they weren't really tweaking his swing at all. If you go back 2 years to when he debuted with the Indians and you look at his swing there, it's the best it's ever looked. If you look at it today, it looks exactly the way it looked when I saw him playing way back in the Kinston, Carolina days. So, and then defensively, you can see sort of how the stress of the playoffs weighed on him to the point where he made some crucial errors, really bad time that really affected the team. So I think we saw the Giovanni Urshela experiment in a stressful full-time situation. Now, Yandy Diaz is another story. We got to see him in September baseball. Now, granted, they weren't really stressed out. They were in the middle of winning 22 games, but Yandy Diaz got a majority of the time in September. I really thought he was going to make the roster, and he didn't because of a variety of reasons that I don't want to talk about right now. Thanks, Michael Brantley. Thanks, Lonnie Chisenhall, for playing when you shouldn't have been. That's beside the point. But I think Yandy Diaz, and you can talk launch angle all you want. You can talk beating the ball into the ground all you want, but this is a guy who continually, once he figures things out, is successful. And I'm sorry, he's a smart player as well, and I think offensively you're going to see if he gets a long period of time, he'll figure things out, and you'll start to see power, and you'll start to see everything that you need to see from a guy who looks like the Incredible Hulk. Defensively, I'll say it once, I'll say it twice, I'll say it 3 times. He is above average defensively at third base. Anybody, including Tito Francona, who says differently just doesn't know what they're talking about. And I'm not saying I know more than Tito Francona. I don't know what he was speaking about at the beginning of the season. This is a guy who at every single level, including at the major league level, once he got his footing, has performed exceedingly well at the position.
I was going to say,
go ahead.
We saw him using the eye test, and he didn't play enough third base for the defensive numbers to matter at all, really. So I didn't even pay attention to those. But using the eye test, he totally can man that position. I didn't know where those remarks came from. I had never really seen him play the field before this major league season, and he was especially good going to his left. Well, he's got the quick twitch, is what you're looking for at third base, and he's clearly got that. It's one of those things where you wonder, any major league manager, you wonder how much they do pay attention to the minor league system. And when you hear a guy talk about having to learn to play third base when he only played the outfield in Columbus for a brief period of time, you wonder if it's just one of those things where Francona really didn't pay much attention to Yandy Diaz because he was so focused on the major league team. Not really sure. Take that however you want to. But whenever you see a guy who I watched play third base for 2 full seasons, winning the best at the position in both leagues, when a guy says he's got to learn how to play third here, it really makes me wonder if he knows what he had. And it does seem like he figured it out by the end of the season. So I don't know. What's your take on this? Because, I mean, listen, anybody who's watching this is going to hear me talk about Yandy Diaz, and they're going to go, here goes Jim again. Now we're going to hear about Greg Allen next. But, I'm a Yandy Diaz beatnik. I mean, I love the guy. I think the guy is going to be a star in the league, and, well, maybe not a star in the league, but certainly one of those players on a team that can matter in moments that count.
But what's your take on this, Gage? I mean, I know you follow the team. I know you wrote at IBI and you paid attention to the minor leagues. Obviously, maybe not as much as I have, just because I've been so focused on the guy for so many years. But you got to see him briefly at the major league level. I mean, what's your take on this? I mean, are the Indians going to go with Yandy Diaz, or is this going to be one of those scenarios where Francona just doesn't buy it, and they maybe bring in I almost said Michael Martinez. Maybe they bring in another guy, maybe one of those long and tooth veterans to come in and play third base, like a Mike Aviles or something like that. Is Yandy Diaz ever going to get a shot?
I think you have the perfect team to give him a half a season to try and hit. I mean, there's on the risk or reward spectrum, he's just the perfect gamble to take over there because projection systems love him this year. They pointed out that his projections are above average bat, which we all know could be true. But Gio, you got in the back pocket who can – his value is always going to be there as a defensive guy, and that's not going to fade away without playing time, you wouldn't think. But let Yandy step in and get him the at-bats. It just seems like something you have to do, unless you can go out and pay $100 million for Mike Moustakas. But no.
Oh, jeez. Oh, man. I might have to crack another beer, man. You're starting to kill me here. I mean, is it – they've obviously value Eric Gonzalez high. I mean, how's he going to play into the mix here? I mean, do you think that the Gio experiment, as we're looking at it as an experiment, truly was an experiment, or is Giovanni Urshela it's hard to evaluate how the field management team assesses these guys. And obviously, at the end of the year, they valued Eric Gonzalez as more important because of his versatility. And they obviously valued the defense of Gio Urshela over the potential offense of Yandy Diaz. I mean, what do you think the evaluation process here? Is it one of those things where Yandy's just not a Tito guy? I mean, is it possible that Gio – I mean, he's always spoken high. The same conversation where he was talking about Yandy being a bad defender, he came back and said, Gio's been doing everything I asked him to do. And, of course, he knew of Gio Urshela from 2015. And, obviously, Eric Gonzalez – he looks in the mirror at Eric Gonzalez maybe standing in the background, and you know who he sees. I'm just – who he sees.
Michael Martinez.
I just – Yes. And I like Eric Gonzalez better than those guys. I mean, if they're going to use somebody –
Mike Aviles.
Are we just setting ourselves up? Or maybe it's me. Am I going to have one of these podcasts with you in 3 months where I'm literally throwing things through the window?
I'm not going to read into Gio playing in October because I have a running theory that was a contingent upon Jason Kipnis in center field. I think they said we're going to punt defense here and we're going to grab defense here. And just because of how they value Gio, I think if Zimmer's healthy, then maybe Yandy's at third base. That's my tinfoil hat. I don't know if it's based on anything, but it's just I didn't necessarily agree with it at the time. And in September, it didn't seem like they were going that way. That's the part I couldn't make. It seemed like Yandy was getting – that injury might have crushed Yandy's chances in the playoffs, too. The hand injury – maybe they didn't feel
I think
like
you look at the combination with Zimmer out and it seemed like their hands were tied. But when they started playing Gio Urshela at shortstop, I started thinking they're clearly looking at this guy as a utility guy, and maybe that's just a down the road thing. But I don't know, man. We don't know much. We're sitting here in mid-November. We really don't know where this is going to go, but we are a couple of weeks away from the winter meeting. So I'm sure some stuff is going to start to happen. I know whenever this inevitable news of Carlos Santana comes down the pipe, I know where everybody at WFNY is going to go, and it's just going to be ugly. It's just going to be ugly. So maybe they'll surprise us because they have done that in years past. So, I mean, is Carlos Santana – he's going to be an Indian next year, right? Come on. Come on.
I was going to ask you where you stand on that because maybe – 2 weeks ago, I was 70-30 yes, and now I might be the opposite, Jim. I don't know nothing to base that on, really, other than Brantley option. But
I'm going to go against the grain because I know everybody's expecting me to be woe is me. Here goes Jim bitching about everything. I just can't imagine. I mean, the sad thing is I can't imagine this, but I'm going to go against the grain. I'm going to stick with your 70-30. I mean, the Indians front office, God, there's so many directions to go. I'm still thinking about Carl Willis. So the Indians front office is a metric-based, they're a metric-based front office. And I cannot fathom that they don't want Carlos Santana on this team. If there's any way they can make it happen, I think they're going to do that. I really wish we could get one little leaked piece of evidence that they're trying to work on a longer-term deal with him while he's deciding on this $17.5 million, because that little shred of evidence that's happening would probably be enough to lock that 70-30 in. Okay, real deal. I'm 50-50 on it right now. I'm looking at that Michael Brantley domino effect, and I don't see him playing left is the thing. I just don't see it. I don't think they want him to play left. I don't see it happening, which automatically means he plays first base. And if that's the case, then I think they look at Carlos Santana as redundant. I think they signed Edwin Encarnacion last year thinking that Carlos Santana was leaving. There it is.
That's perfectly possible, but I don't see you're really not going to gain. You're really diminishing your chances of getting that Brantley surplus value at first base.
Boy,
that is his bat doesn't play there. Unless it goes back to 2014 Michael Brantley, his bat is not first base material. Well, it plays well in left field, but it doesn't play.
Well, it does if he's healthy. And maybe that $12 million option, maybe the Indians are just willing to spend that money because they have a little more money this year. Maybe they just they're going to put Brantley in their back pocket, looking at him as a pinch hitter, because I think, and don't take this the wrong way, people who are listening to this, I'm not calling Michael Brantley a pinch hitter. I don't think. I'm just saying if he is injury prone, with his IQ and his ability, if he's healthy, he would be one hell of a guy to bring in your lineup when you need a stick, because this is a guy who's just that professional bat who can move runners, get on base when you need him to. Okay, I guess I just called Michael.
Are we a fan of the Dodgers now, Jim? Because that's the only team that can afford to pay a pinch hitter $12 million.
Well,
sorry.
Well, we did. First we signed Encarnacion. The next thing I know, we're just forking the money out to Michael Brantley, baby. $12 million for that pinch hitter, baby. All right. Let's stop there. I do want to say one more thing before we get off here. We cannot not talk about the moves. We can't not talk about Carl Willis. We can't not talk about Scott Atchison. And I don't want to talk about the specifics because that's another 30-minute podcast, so maybe we'll do this weekend. Are you confounded by this? Because it seems to me that this really brilliant front office, that's been a really brilliant front office since 1987, since Hank Peters took over. I mean, you're looking at a run of 30 years where they've hired the best. And I'm not talking about on the field, because there's, that's been kind of a build-up, and their on-the-field management team has been fine. And Terry Francona, again, as much as I hammer the guy, I mean, come on, it's Terry Francona. But what in land's hell is happening with this disconnect between a front office that's really in many ways brilliant, hiring people that I don't think mesh with the way that they think? And is it on purpose? I mean, I'm trying to figure out a sensible way to kind of make this work in my head, because it doesn't fit to me. Does Terry Francona hold the kind of weight, maybe with ownership and maybe even with Antonetti, that it's okay that the on the field maybe doesn't mesh with what the front office is looking for? Or am I completely off base here? Are we all completely off base here? Is the front office fine with this because they hired him? I don't know.
I don't want to get into knocking Carl Willis thing. The guy's done what he's done for a long time, and seems like he's got a lot of success doing it. But I'll just say that the hire was not inspiring. That's the best way I can put it. And it doesn't really, like you said, mesh with the metric side as much. But I just question who's in the driver's seat of this and who should be. I don't even know who should be in the driver's seat. an internal discussion that they've had, I'm sure, but it doesn't seem like Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff are the ones hiring Carl Willis. And maybe that's okay. And maybe the manager should have that decision. But does that come to a head at some point? I don't know. And then on the flip side, what I've heard about Scott Atchison is that the reason they put him in that role is because he's very analytically minded. And it just seemed like they
well, this is what it's hard to decipher between a guy like Atchison, who we know is a Francona guy. I mean, obviously, the relationship is solid between the two, and that's fine. It's clear to me, and to be fair, Carl Willis really probably is more of an Antonetti guy than a Francona guy, although the Boston connection is there, the John Farrell connection is there. This isn't a guy that unless I'm missing something, I don't think Carl Willis and Francona have crossed paths specifically on a team. I mean, obviously they know of each other for a variety of reasons, but am I undervaluing Carl Willis? I mean, he has been successful at Boston, and I know the Brian Bannister piece to that. Bannister, fantastic mind, obviously metric-minded guy who almost everybody in Boston is commending for bringing up guys like Pomerantz, and the list goes on and on. But, are we undervaluing Willis? Is there more to this guy than meets the eye? Is it a guy maybe who understands that you have to be okay with metrics? Because clearly Callaway, whatever you think about him, and obviously there's, lots of people who just think he's the best ever, and I'm one of those guys. Obviously the guy's a great pitching coach. I think he's going to do well in New York, to be honest with you. He commanded metrics. He certainly encapsulated metrics. And while I think he overvalued how much he had control over that, I do think that he did value metrics and listened to him and analyzed all the paperwork that was given to him. I don't see Willis doing that. But am I undervaluing that? Is it possible that Willis has lasted this long because he does embrace metrics, at least understanding that there's going to be someone in the system that helps him steer the ship?
I will say that I've been kind of harsh in that regard, because everything I've read about Carl Willis is that he is open to metrics. He just doesn't know. He's been very upfront about that. He doesn't understand them, but he's open to their input. That's basically the vibe that I get from all of his quotes over with the Red Sox over the past couple of years. And like you said, they brought in a brilliant mind, and Brian Bannister, who basically Willis credits with kind of eking him along in that department. So maybe we are being a little harsh, and that there is somebody in that Indians staff that can steer that ship. Maybe an Atchison, I don't know, but he's busy in the bullpen himself. But I would agree that maybe I've been a little harsh on the whole Willis thing. It just didn't mesh with the decisions that you would expect this front office to make. I almost expected another Mickey Callaway type out of somewhere.
Well, and that's the direction a lot of really smart teams are going in. I just don't know the dance between the starting rotation and the bullpen with the coaching staff. I know that, I've heard, little rumors here and there that maybe Callaway didn't get along with the staff, and I'm fine with that. I don't think you have to be effective. You have to be a pal to be effective. Mickey Callaway changed Corey Kluber with Ruben Niebla. And maybe Niebla is the guy that we're not really given enough credit here. Is it perhaps one of those things where Niebla has been such a foundational guy because he was there right along with Callaway, and that shift and maybe the way that Corey Kluber thought about his pitching, the one day that changed it all for Corey Kluber. Obviously Corey Kluber changed it all, but Callaway and Niebla were obviously a major factor in just the way he pitched. Maybe Niebla is the guy we're not giving enough credit to. Maybe him behind the scenes is just as important as, say, Carl Willis on the scene.
Maybe, and I think it's really hard to value how important a pitching coach is. There are certain guys like Corey Kluber and Trevor Bauer who at this point in their career, they don't need a freaking pitching coach. It helps. I shouldn't say they don't need one, but on the spectrum of they're going to think for themselves quite a bit. Trevor Bauer is going to go through the numbers and look at the heat maps for each hitter, and he's going to attack them his own way, whether Carl Willis tells him to or not.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean,
but then you get into the Carlos Carrasco type, whose career was basically changed by Kevin Cash, Mickey Callaway. I don't know where the credit goes on that one, but I know Cash gets undervalued in that too.
Well, maybe Cash gets undervalued by the public, but I think, I mean, obviously people in the know knew how valuable Kevin Cash was to the Indians. I think to the staff and probably to Callaway. I mean, I think if you talk to Mickey Callaway about Kevin Cash, I mean, I know their relationship still exists. And I just, the funny thing for me with Kevin Cash and I've always been intrigued with just these different outlooks of players that look at pitching in a different way. And, the guy that I wanted to see in this Indians organization that reminds me a little of Kevin Cash is David Wallace. And having covered him for a full season and been able to talk to him when he was in Carolina, and really a bad year in Carolina, but they basically gave Dave Wallace Francisco Lindor over his entire career in the minor league system. And I've always looked at Wallace as this really interesting mind. And now Mike Hattery has been talking kind of behind the scenes with Wallace over the past year. And, he is at least as high on Wallace as I am, if not higher. I guess my thing is maybe this is where I struggle with all these moves, is that you have a guy like Wallace, and I don't know, Wallace is not coaching right now. He's kind of behind the scenes for the Indians. But it just seems to me like they're missing out on minds like that. And, you've got Millsy as the bench coach, and I don't know if Alomar is going to be back. It just seems like this coaching staff is kind of rooted in old school values and
old baseball.
Yeah. And I
that
mean,
was my
listen,
biggest issue with Willis. Well, it felt like Callaway was that other side of the coin. And now you're messing with the balance to me. And you have a whole old baseball contingent in the dugout.
Or could it be, though? But okay, could it be this? And we'll kind of end with this. And let me just throw this out there. Is it one of those things where Francona's looking at this team right now as a team with direction? They know what it's like to be in the World Series. They know what it's like to be pissed off to not get there. Did he make these hires? Again, I could see Carl Willis playing this role as a pitching coach who understands that his rotation is set, has some young guys that need kind of figured out, which I think he can probably play to. Is Carl Willis the kind of guy who just sort of says, go that way and I'm going to get out of your way? And maybe is that the guy that's right for the pitching staff?
Perhaps, because you have, who in your pitching staff has less than, I guess you have Clevenger out there. That would be my biggest contention to that argument, is maybe Willis can play that role. But I just feel like a young up-and-comer might be more relatable to a Clevenger type situation where some out-of-the-box thinking might have helped him along a little bit more. And I'm not saying Willis can't think out of the box, because I don't know Carl Willis at all. Maybe, like I said, I'm continuously undervaluing him, but I feel like you're going to feel that in your development side in the future rather than right now. And maybe this was a right now hire, like you said. Maybe they're viewing this window shorter than I am, but you make this hire. It's not just for 1 year, though. That's my thing. You're not just hiring him for this year. You got guys like Tristan McKenzie coming down the pipe in a couple of years. 2019, right?
Yeah. I don't know. With a guy like Tristan McKenzie, I know they're going to be patient with him, but this guy's steamrolling towards the big league club. This guy's got some immense talent. You're not going to rush him because he's young, he's wiry, and oh man, I just can't imagine Carl. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine Carl Willis being able to relate to Tristan McKenzie. How old is he now? 20?
19. He just, to me, the way he's worked through the system, he just seems like he's one of those get a hotel in Columbus for a couple weeks kind of guys.
Yeah, this is a guy, once he makes it to Columbus, he's going to be a double A. No, he'll be at Lynchburg this year. No, he was at Lynchburg last year. Yeah, So this is a guy who's
He should see Double-A on the back end of this year, I would think.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a guy, once he makes it to Columbus, I mean, you don't ever have a guy with his talent sit at Columbus for a long time. I mean, they bumped up, you look at what they did with Francisco Lindor, and I know he's not a pitcher, but they bumped him up. I mean, I think if you look at Salazar as well, I think his time, he might have been half one year, half another. But Tristan McKenzie, to me, is a guy who's got a quick burn as we shift right into the minor league stuff. This guy's got a quick burn. I mean, like I said, I mean, he pitched in Lynchburg last year. He's going to be in Double-A this year. I mean, this is a guy who, if he's electric in Double-A this year, I can't see him pitching a full year in Columbus. Like, Columbus isn't a place where you put Tristan McKenzie for a full year. So, yeah, I mean, this is a guy who maybe mid-year 2019 to control the clock. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe it's because baseball's over and we didn't get to the World Series and we're all just pissy and that's just the way it's going to be. Yeah, but we do have – I mean, at the end of the day, you don't want to waste the window that we have. So we shall see how it all plays out. We're going to wrap things up there. See – here, Gage, you're now welcome to my world. This is where our 30-minute podcast goes an hour and could go 2. And now we've probably lost 200 listeners at minute 21.
We didn't even get Bernice from Idaho on the phone.
Oh, man. Bernice, if you're listening.
Elmer's
I know
here.
my middle name's not El. Well, I don't. All right, I got to end with this. Do you have anything coming out soon? I know we've got a gambit of stuff coming out other than this fantastic podcast that'll be posted later tonight. What do you got? What do you got on the back burner for maybe early next week?
We're just going to be touching on some free agent type stuff. I'm going to focus in on some low-cost reliever types that might be minor league contract flyer, something – maybe even not minor league contract, but just some guys like a Boone Logan that could be that kind of signing this year. So I'm going to be working on that. That should be out in the beginning of next week.
And kind of keep on the listen. If you listen this far, Gage and I will be back soon. The one thing we didn't touch upon in this podcast that I will definitely be in the next podcast is long-term signings, maybe some extensions coming up. There's lots of guys on the docket for potential extensions, including some, well, yeah, I mean, Bauer, you got to think about a guy like Cody Allen because this bullpen that you talked about, this bullpen gets really interesting when you lose Miller and Allen next year. So we do have some very interesting sign for a long time candidates.
Brad Zimmer.
I don't know. Keep forgetting about Francisco Lindor. Kind of want to get him tied up if you can, but yeah, I mean,
pretty far off the dock, I think. But
if he turned down $100 million, what's he worth now? Just won a Silver Slugger. Should have been in the MVP. I mean, got MVP votes. Good Lord, we're gonna have to. I mean, okay, no, next podcast, next podcast. I got a number in my head. Adam Burke. It might be lifetime time. Try to say that 5 times real fast. All right. Thanks for joining us at VHC Pod. Check us out at WFNY. Gage will be writing some stuff. I'm getting back into the mix a little bit. Make sure you check out Bodie's stuff. Make sure you check out Mike Hattery's stuff. The Indians coverage is as good as it gets at any site, so make sure you check us out at waitingfornextyear.com. Thanks for joining me, Gage. It looks like we got a little rapport going.
Yeah, guys with 2 first names. Let's go.
There we go. On to the next.
Have a good night, everybody.